Brazil had so much promise. The car had pace and performance, but we were unable to use that to score any points, either in that sprint race or in the main GP. Alex, as you saw, finished just seconds behind P7, but unfortunately both Vicarbs and Hulkenberg were between him and that point scoring opportunity, and 11th was all we could achieve on the day. In the case of Carlos, that damage he sustained in turn 1 really meant his race was over, and it's disappointing. That's now multiple events where we've really just been caught out in that circumstance. It happens, it's turn 1, there's 3 cars that go into 1. But from that point onwards, the damage to the front wing was significant, and it put us in a position where we were really struggling to keep up with the field. Welcome to the Vowles Verdict, presented by Kraken. The first question is from Christopher, and it's around, with the unpredictable weather, what trade-offs do you make in car setup? Good question. So first and foremost, as you saw throughout that weekend, there was rain, but there was never consistently enough for it to be really in that fully wet condition that we would need in racing in order to make a real trade-off in that regard. So if you definitely know going into a weekend that's going to be X-wet tyres all the way through, so really difficult, wet, treacherous conditions, what you may consider doing is changing a mixture of ride heights, your roll stiffness of the car, and also your rear wing. But the reality behind it is these days, or certainly that I can remember in the last 10 years, it's been very rare, 1 or 2 occasions where you definitely know it's that level of wet all the way through the weekend. In fact, I remember Brazil quite a few years ago where the weather forecast was 100% chance of rain and it was bone dry the next day. And you get caught out in that circumstance, you really do end up going backwards quite significantly as the result if you get the car into the wrong window as well as the right window. So these days, teams rarely move too much apart from perhaps a wing level up and down, just subject to what they think the weather forecast will be. The second element that we end up doing is, for example, we use less either soft tyres or more of another tyre that we're not interested in the dry conditions on Friday, saving the other tyres for the remainder of the weekend. So if, for example, you know it's definitely going to be wet, definitely Saturday and Sunday, you would have a tendency to run perhaps an additional set of tyres on Friday, maybe an additional soft set of tyres to get the car in a better place. Those are the sort of trade-offs that we talk about and go through. Next question is from Erin, which is there anything new you've learned about the car that allows you to be basically optimizing it for the last 3 races? You learn every single race weekend, and that can be, for example, about how you're running the car, where you're in a different setup regime to where you've been previously. What happens if it's damp? What happens if it's wet? What happens if the pressures are slightly higher? It does allow you to have a little bit more optimum understanding of where the car is going forward, because every learning creates a correlation opportunity. Generally speaking though, I'd say between Austin to Brazil, the car's been pretty much in the right window. We've learned what we need to about it. We just have walked away with no points, either from accidents or perhaps not just optimizing the best way possible during the race. That said, what we're now got in front of us between Vegas, Qatar and Abu Dhabi are 3 very different tracks to what we've really had for the last few. Vegas, you've got that really long straight. It rewards now the very low downforce setup, and that's where I think we have a great opportunity with the FW47. Qatar is a completely different track. Again, sprint race. It's one that's physically hard on the drivers, especially if the temperatures are up. It's one where you can run the curbs in a different way, and it's got a lot of medium speed corners and a lot of combined. And again, that's a circumstance where I think it won't suit all the characteristics of that Williams. We just need to make sure they're picking up points. But actually, that's one of our best learning opportunities because it really exposes a weakness of ours, and we can try different setup directions in order to be able to see how the car responds to it. And then finally, Abu Dhabi. Now, Abu Dhabi, the car was good last year. I think it will be good this year as well. But again, it's a different setup to both downforce and otherwise to both Vegas and Qatar. So answering your question, quite a bit of learning coming up in these next 3. Next question is from Michelle, which is, can you explain how the strategy is decided and do the drivers have a part to play in it? So long story short, strategy evolves all the way across the week before a race and even during the race weekend. In Vegas, because we're racing on Saturday, it'll be on the Wednesday that the strategy team will present to the drivers what their expectations are for Saturday. What the tyres are expected to be, how many stops we think it will be, how the degradation will be, how qualifying will be executed. And it's just this early broad view before we go in the weekend to set expectations. There's no real input from anyone else, it's a briefing. Then as we go through Friday, or in this case Thursday, Friday, we get a much better understanding of how the tyres are really performing, and the models get updated. And every single evening, near enough, there are millions of simulations taking place that allow us to understand how to, in concept, execute a clean qualifying and a clean race. So if you focus on the race, which I think is the crux of this question, Sunday morning, in the case of a normal weekend, Saturday in the case of Vegas, we'll sit together with the drivers and a number of engineers, and we'll work through all of the scenarios that we believe will take place in the race. And the strategy team will go there and, for example, in the case of Brazil, present how the one-stop could work, how the hard tyre might have strengths and weaknesses, how the two-stop could work. What happens if there's a VSC, I'm making this up, on lap 4, or at the end of the race, when we would expect to fit tyres? What are the real key elements that we're expecting the driver to feed back to us at that point in time? And we'll work through a number, it's about half an hour to 45 minutes worth of meeting, a number of different scenarios where the drivers can have their input. One of them can be, what do you think on this start tyre? For example, we had initially both tyres soft, but actually we moved to the medium tyre in the case of one of the cars. And that was the input from this morning's meeting, where we went and did more work as a team and as a unit. So the drivers absolutely have a say, and it's exactly the same in the race as well. Subject to how they think the degradation is going, how they're feeling the car, we can dynamically change the strategy on the fly. Now, what it's worth pointing out is, as much information you present before the race, in reality it can be quite dynamic in how the tyres are performing, how the car's performing, and what your race position is in that race. And the result of that is it's very hard for the drivers to see a full picture, and we're trying to describe that as best as possible. And often that's why you see that disconnect between the driver and the team, and it's our job to make sure we bring them on the journey as cleanly as possible. Next question is from Manuel, which is, how is the team preparing for the Las Vegas Grand Prix? I sort of intonated it before, but it's a very different circuit to pretty much everything else on the calendar. It's quite unique, not just to the fact that we're going down the strip by ourselves at night and it's lights all around us, but really the layout of the circuit, the tarmac that we're running on, and it's very hard to mirror anything across any other normal circuit as a result. So preparations are the following. Several weeks before, we start doing work in various simulation tools to allow us to understand where we think we'll be running a setup, how we think we're going to be approaching the free practice sessions, and how to get the most out of the car across that weekend, so that by the time everyone starts flying out, which takes place early this week, it'll be Monday, Tuesday, maybe Wednesday at the very latest, the drive's a little bit earlier than that to accommodate, we have a good plan in mind for how we want to execute the weekend and present that back to everyone. So the work starts several weeks before, builds up, simulation being the starting point, and then we get into the real data that allows us to move forward.